Welcome back to V in the Wild, episode 6, and I am here today with the inimitable Thorny, with the inimitable Thorny Justice and our guest Rachel Moore, who we are delighted to have with us. And we're headed back to Baraboo to Thorny's favorite place to decode. I don't know what number post are you on with Baraboo, Thorny? 7, 8, 6?
No, earlier than that. So it's like five. I think I just finished five,
5?
maybe.
Okay.
So there were sort of two sort of introductory posts, and then the third, fourth, and fifth are all on a specific church so far.
Okay. So all of these posts are on veronicaswift.blog. Thorny is my guest blogger, although she's more like a perma guest. So she's around, and I'm going to keep her around forever and ever and ever.
I've
Um,
moved in.
you have.
You'll never get me off your couch.
I have. I don't think I want you off the couch. Please don't leave. Uh,
She's the emotional support.
right. Oh boy. Um, so as you can see, we're gonna have fun today. We're gonna be talking about some decoding that we're doing and its connections to the Bible and to a whole bunch of different interesting things, both occult and non-occult. Looking at architecture, looking at the structure of the city itself and how it was built, and how all of these things that the occult takes and uses for their own benefit, they display right in front of us, but most of the time we're not savvy enough to know what we're looking at. And so we want to bring this to the forefront and bring it into the public awareness. So if you haven't seen the first couple V in the Wild where Thorny and I talk, you may want to go pause this and go back and listen to those. You'll have a background on a little bit of what we've done so far and what we're continuing to do. And if you haven't subscribed and read her posts, by all means do that. It's not terribly expensive. $26 a year, and you get a lot for that on the blog. You get a new post every Friday, and you get 1,200 plus references and a lot of good camaraderie and information. All right, so you want to share your screen and take it away?
Yeah, well, we're going to give this a whirl. I've never done it before, so bear with me. But how's that working?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Well, it might block a little bit of the lettering, but hopefully we're pretty good. So I wanted to just set the stage here for this conversation by explaining that the biblical encampment plan that's described in the book of Numbers in the Bible, chapters 1 to 3, is really key to understanding Baraboo's layout and what it communicates about the city's brotherhood operations. Now, I wouldn't claim to be an expert, but I've looked pretty closely at a bunch at this point, and I'm very confident that some of the things I'm going to share today are correct. So let's just kind of dig into that and see where we get. If you've ever read Numbers 1 to 3, one of the things that is primarily taking place in those 3 chapters is God laying out his encampment plan around the tabernacle. After the Israelites have left Egypt, they're starting their 40-year wander in the desert. But one of the first things that God does is give them instructions about how they're to be encamped around this tabernacle after he explains to them how to build the tabernacle, how to create that. And so I've sort of created this very elaborate diagram that allows people to see the tabernacle at the center. They basically created a square around the tabernacle, and there all of the tribes were encamped around the tabernacle, and some of the tribes were instructed to encamp on the east side, some were instructed to camp on the south side, some on the west, and some on the north. And there were lead tribes for each of those sides. So on the north, you have Dan. On the east, you have Judah. On the south, you have Reuben. And on the west, you have Ephraim. And Ephraim and Manasseh, for those who are not already aware, are the two sons of Joseph. And so that's how we end up with these 12 tribes, is that Joseph actually is two. And then Levi, which is the priestly tribe, they're in the center. And there are 4 different sides of the Levi house. So you've got the Merarites on the north, you've got Moses and Aaron on the east, the Kohathites on the south, and you've got the Gershonites on the west. Now, in addition to all of that, and that's a lot of detail already, each of these tribes supposedly had banners that they carried. And we don't really know what was on the banners, but there are traditions that have sort of come down through time, things that have been associated with these tribes. And I have put those symbols in the boxes that are associated with each tribe. So Dan would be a serpent, for example, or Judah's a lion. If you dig, you can also find some alternative symbols for these different tribes. Most of them come out of the blessings that Jacob gave to the tribes in Genesis 49. There are a few that aren't as clear from there and that you have to go elsewhere to kind of seek out and understand, but most of them are pretty clear from Genesis 49. In addition to all of that, I've labeled, because this is going to become important later, I've labeled each of the tribes with the specific mother of the person who heads that tribe. So Dan would be the son of Bilhah, for example. There were, like, Jacob had 4 wives. And so you've got Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah, Rachel, and so the little letters that you see in parentheses at the bottom right of each of those colored boxes, those are the mothers. Those are the initials of the mothers. Also, in relationship to all of this, there were cherubic faces that were associated with each of the sides of this encampment. On the north, you have the eagle associated with the camp of Dan. The different sides take the names of the lead tribes. So the camp of Dan is the eagle, the camp of Judah is the lion, the camp of Reuben is man, and the camp of Ephraim is the ox or the bull. Now, what's interesting about that is that these are the faces, these correspond to the faces of what are called cherubim, or we often pronounce it in English cherubim. And cherubim were throne guardians of God. And so they're a heavenly class of being. We might refer to them more generically as angels, but that's not perhaps the most technically correct term. But cherubim had 4 faces. And so each of these sides of the encampment were associated with a different face of the cherubim, which later all of the evangelists also become associated with one of those faces of the cherubim. So you've got Mark is associated with the lion, Matthew is associated with man, you've got Luke with the ox or the bull, and you've got John the evangelist, Saint John the evangelist, associated with the eagle. So that's what we're like. Understanding this bit, this encampment plan, is going to be really key to understanding how this is falsified by the Brotherhood in Baraboo.
Can I
So
interrupt you?
yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so one of the things I read is that the four cherubim or cherubim, it's not actually 4, it's one being with 4 heads, and it
Correct.
sits under the wings of the seraphim on top of the Ark of the Covenant, which is inside the inner sanctum of the tabernacle. So the faces, the man, the ox, the lion, and the eagle are actually on that winged being sitting inside on top of the Ark of the Covenant inside the tabernacle's inner sanctum. So it's actually a reflection of what's inside what they're circling around.
Oh, that's interesting. I had never heard that before. I'm gonna have to do some digging on that. That's a good, interesting bit of information. Thank you.
Yeah. So if yeah, you can look at it. It's in an Aquarius Rising video the one that I number 410 on the website.
Wow,
I
great.
think it's actually like it's a 4D record representation. So
Oh,
Ah, okay.
okay. Okay.
Wow.
Interesting.
Okay. That is very interesting. I'm already learning. This is great. This is why I wanted to do this.
Now that's
Um,
interesting you say that, because one of my other notes because I have to have notes, but when you say 4D, you're talking about dimensional access, yes, Rachel?
exactly.
Okay.
Dimensional, it's both dimensional access, but it's also we're only able to perceive things in 3D, but God, he's able to see infinitely more
right.
than we are. And
Mm,
these beings are also able to perceive, infinitely more than we can.
yeah.
And the way that the Ark of the Covenant is actually laid out is in a not just a 3D thing, but it's actually in a 4D Um, I don't know how better to describe it than
So, like, but maybe
that.
maybe construction is the best word to use
Yeah,
there. It's a 4D construction. It's just that we can only perceive three dimensions of it.
right,
Mm.
right, exactly.
Wow. Okay, well, you're blowing my mind, ladies. This is great.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I read on it is it says it's the keeper of the doorkeeper. It's a keeper of the access to the dimensions, this
Hmm.
angelic being with the four heads.
Yes, and
Hmm.
it's the one that's I think the gatekeeper actually to Eden.
Oh,
Wait, say that again?
I think it's actually the gatekeeper to Eden.
E to Eden.
Oh, yes. Well, that would make some interesting sense. Yeah.
There's so much to
Okay.
this. There's so much to it.
Yes.
So many layers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that was a
Okay,
good
so
interlude. Back to you.
no, that's great. So let's move on to the next slide then. So in Baraboo, which was originally platted as a township called Adams or town called Adams, you have this. You can see on the right the original plat of Adams, and you can see at the very center. I've got it outlined in green, a public square. And just to be really clear, this arrangement is almost unheard of in the upper Midwest, where you have a central public square or a courthouse square. This was much more common. You can find this sort of down south more, and you can find it out east or southeast more. But like here in the upper Midwest, it's incredibly rare. You have maybe two or three examples of this in, like, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, any place like that, Illinois. So it's noteworthy that you've got in Baraboo this public square that's at the center of everything, and it was envisioned this way from the very beginning. When there were like three early county supervisors who asked to have this platted. Adams was platted at their commission. And when that was done, they had this public square there at the beginning, and they always, from the very beginning, imagined that there would be a courthouse standing on that square one day. Now, they were far from having the county seat position. Another town in Sauk County had it at that point. And there was sort of a battle that went on in the 1840s that ultimately Baraboo won. But this was platted well before that battle was won. So it's very interesting to me that these early commissioners, planned this from the very beginning and envisioned this courthouse in the middle of a public square, which was itself in the middle of the town.
It's almost like
Again,
they knew what was going to happen in the future.
that's right.
Yeah.
It's almost like they knew. So on the left, what you see is a picture from the southeast of Baraboo's Courthouse Square. It did not originally have the clock on it. This building is actually the third courthouse. The first was built. It would have been on Fourth Street, but across the street from this building, just a sort of a simple wood frame temporary building that lasted way longer than anybody wanted it to. And then they built a brick structure in the middle of the square, which ultimately was destroyed by fire. And this building that you're looking at now on the left was built in 1906. And the clock tower was added in 1915. So that's sort of the center of what we need to look at here. And you can already begin to understand how this might be the center of a false encampment plan.
Yeah.
Where the courthouse becomes the tabernacle. As a matter of fact, it's got the word in Latin lex, which means law, emblazoned at the top of the building. So, what if you think about God and his law being at the center of things for the Israelites, now you've got this man's law at the center of things in Baraboo.
What's actually interesting to add on to that is that Adam actually means blood. And so
Yeah.
if you're looking at it, it's false blood,
Oh,
the
wow.
false
Yeah.
Hmm.
Christ.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh,
It's
wow.
man's version of what God intended.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
The
Okay. Yeah,
when
go
I
ahead.
looked at this slide, when you sent me these slides, the other day, I looked at this and I thought to myself, why how can you, it seems a stretch to me. How can you place that kind of tabernacle formation on an entire town? But then I read somewhere that this tabernacle is so important that the occult actually uses it as a foundational diagram for pretty much everything they do,
Wow.
which then makes
Yeah.
sense to me, because
Yeah.
if it's the foundational diagram for like everything, then of course they're going to use it for the architecture and the layout of stuff.
Right. And to me, it sort of suggests the fact that this is such a rare configuration in the upper Midwest. That tells me that Baraboo is probably really important somehow, you know?
Well, I think you've already
Um,
demonstrated that with a lot of the other stuff that you've pulled out. Yeah,
well, I'm just
it's
never going
critical.
to stop trying to back it up.
Okay.
um, so, so next slide. So the next thing we need to do is understand sort of how a Kabbalah square or a Kerabic square, then and Kerabic comes, it's the same root as cherubim or cherubim. So we need to understand how that Kabbalah square forms the basis of a false tabernacle encampment. And one of the things that's key here is that in esoteric shorthand, a square often represents a pyramid. And I've got that laid out here on the right so that you can see that really what we're talking about is the base of a pyramid. A square is the base of a pyramid, from which all of the triangular faces would join. They would join at the top if you folded them up. You've got cardinal directions assigned to each of these faces or each of the sides of the base of the pyramid when you're talking about a Kerabic square, Kabbalah square. So the Sauk County Courthouse at the center of Baraboo Square functions as this false tabernacle or temple. And then you've got four surrounding churches. My understanding from what people who've come out of the system have sort of informed us, Veronica, that there would be four nearby churches that would hold these cardinal positions around the church, sort of creating the false encampment around the tabernacle, the false tabernacle. So what I'm really, if you take that and you then think about it in terms of how they falsify all of this. I know Jesse Zaboter has kind of talked a lot about how this would look underground in a ritual chamber.
Yeah.
And we know, of course, that when they're doing stuff above ground, they're really marking stuff that's going on below ground.
Hmm.
So I think this all plays in too. But you would have each of these triangular pointy sides that they would make corners on the sides, and those would be associated with an abyss and with a throne and an altar. And so that's kind of what I'm showing you here. And that there would probably, as I understand it, there would be a set of Baal and Ashtoreth poles on all sides of this deal, because that even if there isn't a gate there, they're representing a gate of some sort. And that the abysses will be aligned to standard zodiac, Chinese zodiac, Egyptian zodiac, and that there are alignments then between the different sides of this triangle and the entities and whatever else is going on here to times, seasons, events, and the creation of false houses, gates, and storehouses. And contracts in the system would be made at these cherubic corners. So that's also key.
We know that there's extensive underground in Baraboo.
Yeah.
We know
Yeah,
there's
we've
trains
yeah.
underground. We know there are meeting places, auditoriums. We're guessing that it's pretty extensive, and
Yeah.
that we only know the a small piece of the information so far. But it's no stretch to my mind anyway that there's something similar to this. Could be something similar to this underground for
Right.
sure there.
Right. And I think that it's also sort of interesting that three of these faces of the Kerabic square have titles with them, or there's interesting words that I'd never heard before until I started working on diagramming all of this. But the north would be Stolistes, the south would be Daduchas, and then there's on the west Helios twilight. And as I started researching all of these words that I'd never seen before, it turns out that they're all ancient terms, two of them coming out of ancient Greece, but they're ancient terms for priest.
Mm.
So they are really aligning these thrones and altars with the notion of having a priest or priestess over them, presumably, right?
Well, we know that there are queens of these abysses,
Yes,
uh,
yes,
and so it makes sense that there would be priests as well.
right. As I started to think about the fact that there would be these four churches associated, one with each of the faces of the Kerbeck Square or the encampment, false encampment plan, I started scratching my head because frankly, Baraboo's full of churches. Even early Baraboo was full of churches. And I'm like, where do I even start to try to figure out, which of these churches would have been assigned to each of these faces and or cardinal directions. And then I stumbled across this article from 2010 where a very prolific local historian, Bob Duell, he was a dentist, like I said, very prolific local historian, also proud Freemason. He wrote this article teasing this walking tour that six of the churches in town had decided to do in October of 2010. And something just dinged in my head. I'm like, oh, I think this is maybe a place I want to start. If a Freemason is telling me these six churches are important, then I think those six churches are important. Now, granted, there's six of them, and only four of them could, I presume, could be associated with the sides of the square, right? That doesn't mean the others don't have roles or aren't tied in somehow. But this is now sort of what I'm trying to figure out is which of these churches are maybe able to be plugged into these different cardinal directions. And so the six participating churches that Mr. Duell, Dr. Duell, he was a dentist, wrote about were St. John's Evangelical Lutheran, First United Presbyterian, First United Methodist, First Congregational United Church of Christ, Trinity Episcopal, and St. Joseph's Catholic. And in addition to the little paragraphs that he wrote on each of those churches, he also, interestingly, included six thumbnail images of church details. And I got to tell you, I have the number of hours that I have had to pour over these low resolution images trying to figure out which image matched which church. It's a little bit insane. You don't really want to know how many hours I spent doing that. I've got most of them matched up. I've got all of them matched up. It's just that one of them, I can't figure out what the detail is. By process of elimination, I know which church it has to be, but I just don't. I can't identify
What it is,
the
yeah.
detail. Yeah, exactly. So, and here I'm just going to show you just very briefly that all of these churches, both where they started out and where they ended up, are all really still clustered around the square. And that's really all I want to demonstrate with this slide right now is that they really are all in a very small area and it's like all within walking distance of each other.
I love how the Masonic Hall is just right there.
Yeah.
I mean, I just had to bring that up.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right? Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't be complete without it, you know.
Oh, exactly, exactly. And I'll tell you what, Rachel, the longer you look at this, oh, the longer you look at this, the more convinced I am that it is. It's just all tied in together. Yep,
Oh, it is.
absolutely.
It is.
Yep.
I could tell you just by looking at the symbolism, but still,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I had to laugh about
No, that's
that.
great. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Laugh or cry.
So,
We're here for both.
Both.
yeah, bingo.
Kind of both.
Yeah.
Thank God
So,
Yes,
he made the church not a building, but people.
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. So,
Otherwise, we'd be drowning in these churches.
So here's my major quandary, right? One of the things that I learned is that a church's actual geographic location doesn't necessarily align to the cardinal position that it holds in relationship to the square.
Mm.
So if that's true, then I have to find other clues that will sort of fill me in or cue me to which church fills which position. And so here's some of the questions that I came up with. And you ladies can tell me what you think of these questions. And if you have answers to any of them, please feel free to shout them out because I'd love the answers. So first of all, how is the cardinal direction assignment of a church signaled? Does altar direction or placement have anything to do with it? Does bell tower placement or style have anything to do with it? Steeple design or height, other architectural elements, additional exterior or interior decorative aspects? It seems to me that all of these things could potentially play in, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Second, does a church have to possess or provide access to a spiritual gate to be assigned a cardinal position in relationship to a square like this?
Mm.
I mean, it would make sense to me that it would,
Yeah.
but I don't know. Three, does the location of a spiritual gate within a church provide clues to a church's cardinal assignment?
Mm.
So, in other words, if the gate is in the ceiling of a church, does that
Yeah.
signify something? If it's in the basement, or if it's in the wall, or if it's in a stained glass window, or like what does that tell us
Or if it's
anything?
underground. What do you think,
Right.
Rachel? Would they be in the churches, these spiritual gates? Spiritual gates still drive me crazy because I don't really
Uh,
understand them very well. Would they be in the church, above the church, or underground below the churches, or maybe more central
I
and just
think it,
accessed?
honestly, I think they can be any or all of the
Oh,
above.
great. Thank you for making
Wow.
that so clear.
Uh,
Well, no, I mean,
No,
if you truly think about, how a spiritual gate is used, it's true.
it could be anywhere. Yeah.
It could be
mm-hmm,
anywhere.
Okay. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And one of the things I was taught is that as a child, the most prominent church was always placed at the highest point. Therefore, you found your high
Oh,
place.
Oh.
oh,
Okay, Thorny,
interesting.
you need a topographic map now.
I do need a
But
topographical
but
map.
no,
Now,
you found your high place that way, and that's where they went to go
Okay.
and worship the spirit.
Wow. Wow.
wow, that is
Okay.
so interesting. Okay. So downtown Baraboo is relatively, I would think that it would be relatively the same height, but not necessarily. And there's one church I'm thinking of which we won't discuss in any detail today, but the Catholic Church in town is located at East and First Streets in Baraboo, and it's really kind of at the top of an incline.
Mm,
So it makes me wonder if that's maybe the church that you would be like, if you're, referring to
yeah.
something being on a high place,
Yeah.
if that's maybe the one, Rachel, because and here's the other thing that makes me wonder about that is that when you look at the murals in Baraboo, which I've written about extensively, what they called the fabric of our community murals, which display kind of local celebrities, people from the past and present who've contributed to the community in some way or other, the overwhelming number of people portrayed on those walls, and there's two big murals and one separate panel, but the
Mhm.
overwhelming number of people portrayed had membership in St. Joseph's Catholic Church.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it. And
Yeah.
usually it was the Catholic Church that was built first. And usually the Catholic Church is built on the high place, and it's
Interesting.
usually built over a prominent pagan site.
Oh, that's even more interesting. So, one thing I can tell you is that there was a local historian in Baraboo. Like really Baraboo's first major historian, local historian, William Canfield. And Canfield, one of the things that he did is map Indian mounds.
Mhm.
Tons and tons and tons of Indian mounds in Baraboo. A lot of them just flat out destroyed because they were in farmers' way, you know.
Yeah, yes.
But there's tons and tons of them. So it'd be interesting to see because really the Catholic Church in Baraboo was one of the last churches built. And
Well,
it makes me wonder if I go back and I look at Canfield's maps, if I could figure out if there were mounds where they ultimately built the Catholic Church.
I'm sure you probably could. I mean, in my own hometown, they built the Catholic Church on top of the Indian reservation.
Mm.
I mean,
Oh,
you know,
yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
it doesn't have to be a mound, but it's just on top of a what they considered a pagan place,
Right.
and a place of power.
Right.
And
Um,
is that power from like desecrating it? Is it from rituals or sacrifices or from
right,
something else?
exactly.
Okay.
Well, one thing I can tell you, though the Catholic Church was one of the last important churches built in Baraboo, it started out the first. So they started out meeting in somebody's house on the south side of the river, of the Baraboo River, and then they bought a little brick building from the Congregationalists. I think it was the Congregationalists when the Congregationalists decided to build a bigger church. And that building was, let me just go back here and I'll show you where it was. You'll find this very interesting. Um, okay, if you look, you see where the Masonic Hall is. You pegged that right away, Rachel. So that Masonic Hall, where that was later built in like 1891, that was on Second Avenue. And if you see just below that, you see a 6 and a 2 in blue dots. And the first church there would have been the first Congregational. It's actually the same building, but I just didn't know how to represent that two different congregations met there. But the Congregationalists sold their building, their first building, to the Catholics. And so the Catholics were meeting on that corner at Second and Oak, right across from where the Masonic Hall was built in 1891,
Mhm.
and just as, like a block south of the courthouse square.
Now, if
So
my memory serves me correctly, and it might not, Congregationalists were, yeah, Congregationalists were quite a set of witches and warlocks.
Mhm.
yes,
So that makes sense to me.
yeah, yeah. No, you will not get any argument from me based on my research of the Congregationalists.
Okay.
Let's see. Oops. All right. So final question: does a church's cardinal assignment ever change? And one of the churches we're going to look at today gives me reason to believe that maybe the answer to that maybe could be yes, but I don't know. Rachel, do you know anything about whether the cardinal position of a church could ever change?
That I honestly don't know.
Okay.
Because, I mean, honestly, with the times, people change, towns change, layouts change, the
Mm-hmm.
lines change. So I don't see why it's not a possibility, but do I know that for an absolute fact?
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Okay, well, with all of this and the questions laid out, let's maybe just launch into the first of the churches, which is First United Methodist, which I've written about fairly extensively at this point. On the left, you see the very first, well, not the very first building that they built was at the same location where this 1853 building that you're seeing was located, but it was just a very rough log building that they ultimately replaced with the 1853 building. And you can see where it was on the right. I've got the courthouse outlined in green. And if you go just a block north to the corner of Broadway and Fifth, you'll see where that Methodist church was. It was positioned in a manner that's really interesting to me. In the 20th or 21st century, you'd think, well, okay, the front entrance of that church would either have been located on Fifth Street or it would have been located on Broadway, right? Because it's like hard up against that corner,
Mhm.
but it wasn't. The front entrance was actually at the south. It's weird. It's the altar is faced north. The entrance is to the south, if that
Interesting.
makes any sense. And here you see the church today. This was built in 1898 and it was relocated. This church was built a block south on the other side of the street, so the corner of Broadway and Fourth. And you can see it's kitty corner from the courthouse square at that point.
I wonder if they're changing it to go with magnetic north.
Say that again.
I wonder if they're changing the location of the church based on magnetic north.
Oh,
Because you have true north and you have magnetic north.
Hmm.
oh, interesting. Oh, that's a very interesting possibility. Just is that something that comes into play quite a bit, Rachel?
Well, when you're dealing with spiritual things, and I mean, you have to deal with energy and the flow
Mm,
of the energy. It's everything.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. So, here's some possible clues about this church then.
This is
This
a
church
big
is
one.
wild. This
This
is
is
a
a big one right here.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So first of all, the altar position of this church has consistently been north. The 1853 church, the altar is faced north. The current church, the altar faces north. The bell tower position in 1852, it was at the center front of the building, as you saw. In 1898, it moves to the southeast corner of the building. And then we know there is clear evidence in this church of a spiritual gate, and that it is in the ceiling of the sanctuary. Like, what I'm wondering is, does the location of that gate maybe signify something about what face of the square it would be associated? Would it be air and north? The other possibility in my mind is it a spiritual gate that, because it's a spiritual gate that looks like it's marked by a golden crown, would that maybe be lion, king, Judah, thus east?
Let me throw something out even more plausible, or not more plausible, but even more out there. The Plantagenet line.
Oh,
mhm.
That is the Plantagenet rose.
oh my.
the the ceiling decoration.
Yes, that rose.
Oh,
It's very specific to the War of the Roses.
Okay, so
oh.
that's a specific bloodline reference then.
Yes, it is.
And that's a giant bloodline, and
And
it's
that goes
the
to Jesus Strand.
yeah, the Jesus strand bloodline.
Wow. Wow. Well, and as if you've been reading my other posts at all, that's another thing that many of the people on those murals in Baraboo share. I've for sure found at least 50% of them now who tie back to the Jesus strand.
And it also ties to the Ipswich League. And that ties, what else was it?
Say that
I can't,
again. To the
the,
what league?
there's
The
something called,
Epworth League.
Oh,
oh,
Epworth.
Yeah.
Upworth,
Right. Okay.
Upworth. There
Epworth.
you
Yep,
go.
yep, yep,
Yeah, I'm
yep.
sorry.
That's okay.
I'm not Methodist, so
No, it's okay. I didn't know about it either till I started
it's
researching this
just,
church. But
it's
this was not always
crazy.
yeah. So it was first. It used to be First Methodist Episcopal Church, and the
Hmm.
Epworth League was essentially the youth league or the young people's league for the Methodist Episcopal denomination.
Yes.
Yeah. So what you're saying then is that the Epworth League was like essentially a training ground for people who were
I'm,
bloodline.
I'm wondering, yes, I'm wondering
Okay.
so.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting.
And I'm also wondering if this church is not just a spiritual gate to, we usually put spiritual gates to heaven, to hell, to, east, west, or whatever. Is it a spiritual gate to a specific place?
Hmm.
Mm, Theoretically, like what would you maybe surmise that would be or might be?
Well, that's the white rose, so I think Henry VIII, the Tudors,
Okay.
something to
Wow.
do with that.
Okay. Might be interesting to
Okay.
look that crown up and see if that crown associates with that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Wow.
Well, let's look at a few more clues then. So this was the first thing that cued me that there was a spiritual gate in the
Mhm.
church. These are like semicircular windows that are above the double like front entrance in the bell tower as you're going into the sanctuary. And so you see the first Methodist Episcopal on the left, and you see enter his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise on the right, and the palms, which sort of signifies priestess activity. But then I looked at this and I thought as I was trying to put this slide deck together, I thought, oh, I'd noticed that there were color striations with, like sort of a deep gold going into like a pale blue, um, like from right to left. But I wondered, is that designed to be read as the sun rising in the east? So is this telling me that this is like the East Church position? Don't know. Don't know. And then there's also these weird red dots that I have racked my brain over and racked my brain over and racked my brain over. I'm not sure what those are supposed to be, if it's a constellation of some sort, or I can't find anything that matches it. But like, I think those red dots must be important somehow.
Yeah, I was thinking a constellation.
Hmm.
Yeah, but which one?
I know.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Lord,
Dang.
Oof.
So those are possibilities to think about. And then here, of course, is the ceiling of the sanctuary before and after renovation. And what's really fascinating to me here is that there's a pronounced difference in the ceiling appearance before it was renovated in I think it was the 1990s, and after. And you can see the
Mm,
gold, how much they've accentuated the gold
yeah.
on the right after the renovation.
Yeah, if you didn't know any better, it almost looks like it's different in multiple
Yeah.
ways. You really have to study it to see that it's actually the same thing. They really focused on the wheel structure, the spokes
Yes.
structure is much more pronounced.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. They've really kind of, I mean, the curly cues are still there. I'm assuming they're raised, that's a raised
mhm.
feature in the plaster. So you can still see those curly cues sort of on that inner ring, but they've all been covered in gold, as has the stuff on the outer
Well, and with the
part of
wheel
the.
structure, you bring in the rotary, the
Yeah.
Rotarians, you bring in the bondage wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
trafficking?
So
Are they trafficking through this gate?
I would say so, yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That's very interesting. And well, of
But
course,
that's just
Baraboo.
my that's
Yeah.
just me.
It's a guess. It's
Yeah, it's
okay.
a guess.
It's
Okay, understood.
But you have a very, very high probability. Very high.
okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay. And then another thing that we can look at is that there are these four roundel windows in the sanctuary window bays that signify the four elements and cardinal points. And Rachel, kudos to you, because Veronica and I did a post just sort of putting a lot of the symbolism from this church out there before I'd even written my post about First Methodist, not even naming the church. And you like honed in on these roundel windows right away and said,
Mhm.
interesting. Four elements. And I remember you asking, why is the cross and crown standing in for east here? That's a great question. Or fire. So you've got dove, air, north, crown and cross, fire, east, anchor, water, south, and wheat, earth, west. Are these a potential clue?
I would say they have to be. If anything, they're showing potential places where there's a ritual going on.
Mm-hmm.
Are they standing? Are there places where people would stand?
Oh,
They,
interesting. Maybe.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah. So, I want to just take a look here.
Yeah, wow. So you think there
Um,
could actually be rituals going on inside the church? And are these in the sanctuary? I forget, Thorny.
yeah, these are all
Through
these
the
are all in the
sanctuary.
sanctuary.
So you
Yep.
think these might be standing position markers
it's
for
possible.
sanctuary rituals?
It's very possible.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. So, okay, let's move on to the next possible clue here. There are multiple windows bearing torches and lanterns, which sort of screams initiates of the flame to me, but it also makes me wonder if it's accentuating the idea of fire and east,
Hmm.
maybe. And then if
Wow.
you compare that to, this is the other thing that makes me wonder about that. If we go back to this set of roundel windows and Rachel's question as to why is the cross and crown, which is a known like Rosicrucian and like high level Masonic symbol,
Mm.
why is that standing in for fire here? Is this tying in with the ceiling and everything else to sort of signal that this is the Eastern Church? And then you've got all of these torches and the lantern that also sort of highlight that fire
Mm.
aspect. Don't know, but I'm wondering.
Yeah. There's so
And
much
then,
symbolism in this church. It's
yeah.
just
But here's
overwhelming.
here's one that maybe this maybe throws a monkey wrench in it. So you've in this church also you've got at least three windows that reference wheat,
Mm.
which would
No,
be which would be a west thing.
no, but that is actually that is considered a good. That's considered something they would use as currency.
Oh,
And each
so
one of them are different phases of wheat.
Oh, interesting.
Hmm.
So what you're saying is that this may not be a reference to directionality, cardinal directionality, but more to currency.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Very interesting. And I know that wheat is also a symbol within at least within the Freemasonic realm for recruitment. So maybe this is a big recruiting church. Okay, so in my mind, I feel like there's strong evidence that First Methodist holds at least, it holds one of the four cardinal encampment positions in relationship to the courthouse square. I don't think there's any evidence that this church holds the south position. The question in my mind is it north, east, or west? And it seems to me, based on some of the things that I found and some of the things that are being tossed out in our conversation today, that east might be the strongest bid here.
Hmm.
I would go with east.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's exciting. Maybe I'm starting to hone in on something here, narrow it down. Okay. So next we move on to the second church, which is First United Presbyterian, formerly just First Presbyterian. All these united things are after denominational mergers happen years later. But First Presbyterian started out in 1852 in this little wood frame structure, also on Second Street between Oak and Ash Streets. And you can see on the right, I've got a sort of the Sanborn maps that I was using to like lay all of this out are divided up into sheets. And so things don't always conveniently fall on the same sheet, but you can sort of see where the edge, the eastern edge of the courthouse square is there with the bold green line.
Mhm.
And First Presbyterian was built on Second Street, just about like a little east and south of the square. And it was later sold when they decided to build a bigger church. It was later sold to the German Methodists, which is also an interesting church. We won't be talking about that one today, but it did not get destroyed. It got sold initially, and the German Methodists ultimately knocked this one down to build a bigger building. But it's actually still there. It's now the American Legion Hall. So there's your first building for First Presbyterian. And there are a few things that I would note about it right away, and we'll get back to them more closely in a minute. But the structure of the bell tower here, I think, is really interesting. And also the fact that it's got two sets of pilasters on the front. Now, pilasters are stand-ins for columns. So kind of like a square is shorthand for a pyramid, pilasters are shorthand for columns. So this is a fascinating church because they're literally in a way like it's four different churches that we're talking about, three of them at the same location. So we've seen the first one. In 1873, they relocated to the northwest corner of Third and Ash Streets, which is, as you can see, it's about a block east of the square. And it's probably about like a half a block as the crow flies from their original location on Second Street. The 1873 building is fascinating to me because it has a rose or a wheel window in the gable front. And
Yeah.
then it changes again in 1963 and that rose window is taken out, but there's a hat tip to it, which we'll get a closer look at in a minute. And then finally, there's a 1989 rebuild that was necessary because architecturally the church was, the walls were leaning outward. And so they literally didn't have a choice but to rebuild. They did save the bell tower and one wall from the previous church, from the 1873 building, and some buttresses. But you can see it's quite a bit, the look is quite a bit different by the
Yeah.
time you get to 1989. So let's take a look at some possible clues on this church. Again, you've got these two sets of pilasters on the front elevation of the 1852 church that provide indications, to me at least, that the church contained a spiritual gate. It's really hard for me to ignore that kind of evidence. You've got pilasters flanking the bell tower that go all the way up to the underside of the bell tower, and pilasters that end just below the discontinuous entablature at the outer edges of the front face of the church. What's even weirder about this church Actually, I'm going to look at this. Look at the if you look at the top of the bell tower, you see these four wooden spiky things, one at each corner.
Yeah.
And, and I can't help but think that the construction of that belfry and bell tower is in something. I don't know what. Rachel, have you ever seen that before?
No, no, I don't know what that means.
Okay,
I know it's
interesting.
something significant, but I
Yeah,
don't know what it means.
yeah.
And the funny thing is too, is it's not a steeple. So it's not collecting energy. It's like it's giving energy out.
So dispersing.
Oh,
Dispersing.
really? Is that maybe part
Yes.
of the significance of those little spikes then? Is
Y-
that an energy distribution thing?
Yeah, yes, because usually when you have this spire, the sharp, um,
Point. Yeah.
it's they're collecting energy.
Wow, so interesting. So that is really curious because actually, let me go back one more because
Right
as you can
there.
see, yeah, you've got this. This is actually the tallest spire in Baraboo. There is no other church that even comes close to having a steeple that high. So in 1873, that thing, you're saying that steeple would be an energy collector.
Yes.
And if you go back even further, look at the original 1873 building. You've got both a spire now, and you've got these mini spires around it. So this idea of the spikes at the
And the triangles.
corners,
Yeah.
yeah, and the triangles, right? So that those spikes don't go away; they just get more elaborate.
Exactly.
Um, but then they disappear in the 1963 model. So it seems like, is it not? It's not dispersing energy anymore. It's just collecting.
Are they is it collecting energy now? I mean, think about as Luciferians get older, let's just be honest, they need a source of energy.
Mm,
Mm, yeah.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
I mean, I could be wrong on that, and I'm willing to be, but that's what I see.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So here's another possible clue then. In the 1963 remodel, like I said, they took out that rose window and they put in this massive bank of colored glass. And like you see at First Methodist, where you've got this striation of color on those semicircular entrance windows going from east to west, here you've got like really deep orange glass just above the front entry doors going to yellow and then kind of up into pale blue. And so it's the same spectrum, light spectrum that's being signified, I think. It's day spectrum, which, tells you something about what the priests and priestesses in that location are maybe operating off of light spectrum wise. But here it's going from bottom to top. So I mean, is that a clue maybe about which position this church holds? If and it sort of seems like it might be on First Methodist where it's going east to west with the sun rising in the east. Is this, the sun coming is this south maybe? I don't know. I'm just tossing stuff out there. Let's
Which
see.
you
And
wouldn't.
then what's up?
I don't know on that.
Okay. And then another possible clue here. So one of the little thumbprint images in that weird 2010 newspaper article
Mm,
where I spent hours and hours trying to figure out which symbol matched which church or which detail. There was one that looked like a rooster, and somehow after like weeks and weeks and weeks of trying to figure out where that rooster was, I must have stumbled across just the right image or like from the right angle. And here was the rooster on the roof line, like on top of one of the buttresses at First Presbyterian Church.
yeah.
And that's also sort of like a weird to me. What roosters in the Bible? Like, what do you associate roosters with?
Uh, Sunset, sunrise.
Yeah,
That's the Masonic meaning.
yeah, but
Mm,
also like denial of Christ. I mean, like when
Hmm.
I think rooster, the first thing I think is Peter denying Christ, 3 times before the cock crows. So to me, it's a really weird symbol to put on the top of a church. Does anybody else find that bizarre?
yeah. It is. It's
Ah,
associated a little bit with the Presbyterian Church in general. I did a little digging on it, and
Oh,
they
really?
use the rooster off and on. They have a kind of a glossy way of describing why they use it. It didn't really sit very well with me, and I can't remember at the moment. But yeah, some of them, not all of them, though. So it seems to be select. The rooster is
Interesting.
selective, which Presbyterian Church uses that symbol.
well,
Well,
then you
and
also have your chamber of reflection.
right. Well, this is the other thing that I wondered about is this signaling that there's a chamber of reflection under the church? But the other thing I wondered about is, once they got rid of that central bay of windows from the 1963 remodel, again, let's look at that just for a second. Once this is gone, if this is signaling a light spectrum, or if this is signaling something about the position of the church in relationship to the square, once that's gone, does this rooster sort of subtly tell you similar information? I don't know, but when does the cock crow? It crows when daylight hits, right? So, yeah, I don't know.
There's also one, it's the Nightly Order of Saint John. I don't know how it's Cantius or something.
Huh.
Investure, and it's the Brotherhood of the Rooster is what it's called.
Oh, really? Oh, so there's actually an order that has that as its
Mm,
emblem.
yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, there's some stuff to dig on. Okay. And then let's just take a look too. This is possible clues, changes in the bell tower appearance. And we're already getting at this a little bit from our discussions, it seems like. But you have these very clear changes between 1852 and 1989. So you start out with the flat roof and the spikes at the corners. You go to spikes and a steeple, and then the spikes disappear, but you also notice that you get these weird striations. I suspect that means something too. I don't know what. And then by 1989, when they do the rebuild, those striations are gone. The
Hmm.
the changes in color in the roof tiling.
Hmm.
So this is where we're going to start, I think, to get into some meat where we can maybe make some real determinations. Altar wall position here, I think, may actually be important. So in 1852, you start with a north sanctuary wall. In 1873 to 1989, it's once you've got that 1873 church, the sanctuary wall is east facing. And then 1989, when they do that rebuild, they literally reconfigure the church to put the sanctuary or to put the altar wall facing north again. And you've got this like glass bay that juts out. And I find that really interesting. Why would you totally reorient the altar wall
Because of
in
what's
this
underground.
church? Say that again?
Because of what's underground.
Because of what's underground. Okay. So is it possible, Rachel? So if you think back to that, like I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, like if you look at that plan of like a of ritual chamber with the four faces and the corners and all of that, and you have these titles that each of the directions holds.
Hmm.
And what I understand is that at least with the north and the south positions, they're titled because they indicate what they watch over, and what they face indicates what they watch over. So in other words, the south is titled to indicate that it's watching over something in the north, and the north is titled something that indicates it's watching over something to the south. So what I'm wondering is this window that's now cut into the north sanctuary wall of a church where the altar formerly faced east, is that telling us that this is maybe the southern position church and that it's, watching over something to the north?
Not necessarily, because I mean, with Freemasonry, you're always going towards the east.
Um,
That's your
okay.
answer to everything.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Literally.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. Okay.
So, yeah. Are these
And
mirror?
I'm looking at it as three arches in
Right.
the middle.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, the middle part. The
So
middle
you
part.
have
Yeah.
your
So
northern wall being
yes,
marked.
I totally agree with you there. That's my big
And
suspicion as well.
that
Yeah.
looks like an organ
Yeah.
right back in there.
Yep.
And what do people do with organs?
Yep.
To travel.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. Gate. Yep. Yep. I totally agree. And then, but the shift from east to north just sort of freaks me out. I'm like, why would you do that? So, all right. So to me, evidence suggests that First Presbyterian may hold one of the four cardinal encampment positions in relationship to the courthouse square. About which one?
Mm.
I do not. I don't know. I'm inclined to say south, but I don't know. Last church on our list for today is First Congregational, and we've already talked about First Congregational a little bit. What you're seeing on the left, it's actually the second church of the Congregationalists. You already know where the first one was because I showed you that the Catholics ended up buying it. It was
Mm.
at the corner of Second and Oak.
Mhm.
This is their second church, and it was in the middle of the block between on Third Street. Well, would have been Third Street then. It's now Third Avenue, but between Broadway and Birch Streets. So if you look on the right, you can see it's just half a block west of the courthouse, that second building. And like the others, it starts out with a bell tower that is front and center. Now, that may be, I mean, maybe it's nothing more than, this is an emerging town and there are a limited number of builders and carpenters available and they're all building kind of on a similar plan. I don't know. But it's interesting that that's how it starts. And then this is how it ends up. In 1895, they build a few blocks north at the corner of 6th and Broadway. And here you can see on the left, like the north facade and the west facade. So the north facade faces 6th Street and the west facade faces Broadway. And I have a lot of questions about about this church too. I'm not as confident that there's a gate here. I just don't know, but I do think it might be marking at least one north wall. What do you think about that, Rachel?
I do think it's marking a north wall. I also see, I mean, look, it's got an undercroft. It's got underground. If you look at the windows,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Basement. Yep.
it's
Yep.
got a basement.
Yeah.
Yep. And like I've was it Jesse? I think it was Jesse, maybe it was the boater that said that when you see a building with three arches in a row on all four sides, that it's actually maybe marking four north walls.
Yes.
Um, so I'm wondering, does the steeple here maybe signify that or not?
I don't know. I
Okay.
don't know on that.
Okay. It's a theory. It's a
Yeah.
possibility.
Possibility.
Um, and then possible clues here. So altar position changes. You have in 1852 a north facing altar, and in 1895 it switches to the south. Bell tower position starts out center front, like I said. 1895, you end up with a bell tower on essentially the northwest corner. It's not true to the northwest corner, but it's closest to the northwest corner of the building. Possible clues here again, looking at the faces, maybe window placement and belfry design. One thing that occurs to me is that when you're looking at the north facade, that ribbon of five windows with the arches over them,
Yeah.
I wonder
Um,
about that. Is that anything that's familiar to you, Rachel?
it's familiar. I just don't remember what.
Okay.
Mm.
Another thing that's interesting here, you've got three vents in the eaves of this church, but one of them, the one that faces west, has a sunburst pattern to it. So is that a marker of some sort? Possible clues inside the church or like looking at the stained glass, it's easier to see from inside. Here's the sanctuary's east bay window, and you've got, these sort of like dogwood looking blossoms that are maybe stylized X's. You've got in the middle there butterflies that are like so subtly worked in, but they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've also got you've got a cross and crown, but this cross and crown is really interesting because it doesn't look quite like any other cross and crown that I've seen. I usually see them either with the cross straight up and down, ringed by the crown, or I see the cross tilted to the right. Here you've got a cross tilted to the left. And I'm not entirely sure what that tilting means. And it also is set right in the middle of what looks like fractured glass.
Yeah.
Well, the whole thing screams Rosicrucian. I don't know all of the symbolism in it, but I know it's screaming Rosicrucianism.
Hmm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of purple in this glass too,
Well, and that
and in
would
this church.
there
Yeah.
you've got your what order is that again?
Order of
Melchizedek.
Melchizedek,
Melchizedek right there.
initiates of the
Um,
flame. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
mean, this church is screaming.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And you've got the equilateral crosses all over the place in
Hmm.
these windows too. You've
Which is
got
the
two on the
Templars.
yeah,
Templars. Yeah.
yeah. Yep, two on the east and two on the west. So,
So this is high
um
level. These are high level people and their military as well.
yeah,
Yes.
Hmm.
yeah.
There's
And
got to
then
be a gate
also
here.
well, maybe there is. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not
Uh,
clear.
I think
I
there's
just
more
don't
than one.
More than
You think
one.
there's more than one gate here?
Yeah, I do.
Wow. So what tells you that?
Well, if I'm looking at the far right-hand picture,
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at two, let's see, you've got your northern wall, and then you've got your two pillars,
Hmm.
and then you've got what are the two circles.
Hmm.
It's
Oh,
two gates at least.
Okay. Yeah.
wow. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. Also,
Wait a minute. Wait a
there's
sec. Would
go
that
ahead.
be would you have two gates because one goes horizontal and one goes vertical, or are you talking gate to heaven, gate to hell, or how would that play out, do you think?
That I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Another question. So, also, if you go back and look at the second picture from the left, where you've got the butterflies on the bottom, you can see a butterfly. But above that, you also have this sort of sunburst pattern, like in the blues and purples.
Yeah.
So I wonder about that too, especially since you've got the sunburst on the vent on the exterior of the
Yeah.
church.
So that's
Uh,
Golden Dawn.
I think
Hmm.
so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a peek at the West Bay. Same deal here. You've got, I mean, the same layout of windows and many of the same symbols. But in the center of this one, instead of a cross and crown, you've got the lilies, three lilies. Well, actually, five if you're counting buds.
Hmm.
Um,
That's
and
loud.
yeah. So is that, and I wondered, is that a bloodline thing? Because like the fleur de lis, that's like a Priory of Sion, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, it
Is that
is.
okay? Okay. Another couple of clues in the stained glass here. On the left, you see the altar wall in this church is very, very simple. It's just these two stained glass windows, and then the First Congregational United Church of Christ. It's really the United Church of Christ logo, which is alchemical. I've written
Yeah.
about
Yeah, I was
this
gonna say it looks
elsewhere.
like J.K. Rowling actually attends that church.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry. Just I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, there's definitely alchemy going on here. Definitely, definitely.
Sorry, bad Rachel.
No, it's okay. And well, what's clear is that's denominational, right? Because that's the denominational logo.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah.
like we were talking about congregational churches being a nice haven for, witches and warlocks.
Yeah.
It's a
Hmm.
pretty clear
Pretty safe bet.
signal there. So I'm not sure what I'm supposed to understand. I'm sure there's something about these altar wall windows that I'm supposed to understand, but I don't know how to read it.
From the
Um,
crown above it, the crown above it actually almost looks like Braille symbolism.
mm,
It looks like a if you look at it just instead of thinking it's an actual crown, look
mm.
at it as a table, a round table,
Oh.
the
Oh,
chairs.
Oh, yeah.
It's
interesting.
almost like a Braille church.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Now, if I look at those windows, the kind of pinky blue ones with the bright pink
Yeah,
in the center, if I
Hmm.
yeah.
squint at them really hard, it almost looks like a stylized fleur de lis in the center
Hmm.
pointing up and then another stylized one pointing down.
Hmm.
Oh, interesting.
But I can't see them very well. They're really blurry, so my eyes
They're
are
super
could be
blurry, and I
playing
didn't
tricks on me. I don't know.
Yeah, and my apologies for the photos in on this church because the only access I had to view the stained glass was through like videos that they did
Yeah.
during COVID when nobody was in the church, and they had somebody like that's a whole big hilarious story. Veronica and I have laughed over a lot. But there's like somebody walking through with a camera and pointing it at the windows and at various aspects. But I literally had to take screenshots from video, so that's all I've got currently for this church. But on the right, you have a bay of windows. These are north-facing windows. So, like if you remember the five ribbon windows with the arches over them on that
Mhm.
north face,
Right.
these are just above those in sort of an office area. It's interesting to me the colors that are used here. I suspect those may be significant, but again, not clear what. It looks like two gold and one purple
Mm.
with different interesting caps on them.
I
Not
heard
sure.
Shalom Girl talk about on a recent video, like within the past month. She talks about Illuminati orange, and I never heard that term before. You
Huh.
think of the orange, House of Orange in the Netherlands, but I
The
don't know if
British
that's
orange.
a thing, Illuminati orange in other places too. I don't know.
Huh.
Well, okay, my bloodline on my mother's side would go back to the Duke of Orange many generations back.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
I mean, it is an actual thing.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean anything if it's not current.
Mm,
Right. Okay.
It really
Yeah.
doesn't.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Well, next clues here.
Oh God, I
So
forgot about
here's
that
Oh yes.
horrendous looking thing.
Yes,
Oh.
yes. So you first of all you have the altar wall arrangement and decor. So you've got this very raised area where the choir tends to sit by those
Hmm.
windows that we just looked at.
Yep.
And then also you have these kind of weird wooden framed decorative pieces. They're not stained glass, but they look like the outlines of stained glass to either side and the arch there. I again, are these clues? I don't know. Asking myself.
It's one of the
Um,
ugliest church altar
Yes,
areas I've ever seen.
they
I mean,
almost remind me of the witches symbol.
uh,
mm,
A little bit, just kind of.
yeah.
hmm, hmm,
Wow.
I'd have to relook it. I'd have to look it up again. It's been a long
Okay.
time.
hmm.
But
And then over on the right, what you see is like a metal sort of sculpture that's hanging on the soffit wall as you come into the church from the parking lot entrance. You have the choice to either go upstairs or downstairs to the upstairs to the sanctuary or downstairs to the basement. And this is hanging on the soffit wall down to the basement. And I'm sure that people who are uninitiated are supposed to think this is a dove. To me, I'm pretty positive it's a phoenix.
it's either a pearl or a phoenix. It's a death. It's something that has to do with death.
Oh, that's lovely.
So this at least that's what I'm getting.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. That's
I'll
pretty
just go back to that.
creepy.
It is
Yeah,
creepy.
I
Totally
agree.
creepy.
Yeah.
It's just
It
it
So,
reminds.
screams. It screams. This does not belong in a church.
right.
No, it doesn't. None of that does.
So does that
Mm-hmm.
have would
Reminds
that
me
have
of
anything to do with an Arthurian line or Arthurian lineage or church? I don't remember a crow being a big part of that, but
no,
if that
no, it's not. That would
no.
be more like the Norwegian,
Okay.
Scandinavian.
Hmm.
Right. Okay.
Okay. All right. Next, we have what is an undeniable echoing of pattern between First Methodist and First Congregational. And I will tell you from my own research, newspaper research in particular, there's a particularly close relationship over time between the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and the Congregationalists in Baraboo.
Okay.
They're like a little triad. So just keep that in mind. But in particular, in between First Congregational and First Methodist, you have this pattern echoing that when you start looking closely at things, you can't deny that it's there.
Mm.
So when you look at the belfry for First Congregational, you see the three arches and then the circles sort of dotting them like eyes
Yep.
almost. And in the west window bay of First Methodist's sanctuary, you have the big arch in the middle here, but you also on either side flanking it, you have the arches that are dotted like eyes. So that's interesting to me. And then there's another pattern that gets echoed here.
Wait,
Um,
it
so go ahead.
is it, wait, can you go back to
Yes.
that one? You
Yes.
see, what about the angel in the middle?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it keeping the angel in or is it
Yeah.
trying to keep it out?
Oh.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, wow.
Mm,
What do you think? Is
mm.
that a clue to the entity that they're an entity that they've contracted with, or an entity that they are working to control? Like, what do you think? What's
There
going?
is something to do with that angel.
Holding what looks like a scroll unfurled, or
Yes.
something that goes from lower left to upper right.
Yeah. Hmm. Interesting.
I wonder who they say it is, if they say at all.
Right? It just it.
I don't think they
Sorry.
do. If I go back to the video, like a lot of the images that on this church I pulled from a video as well, but I was able to get you and I both were able to get
Yeah.
better images, Veronica. They did a video on the symbolism of this church. First Methodist produced a little video. And I think that they do say in that video what the scroll says or the banner that the angel is holding. So I'll have to go back
Go
to
back and
that
look. Yeah.
video and see if I can figure that out.
That circle almost looks like what I've heard some people describe as what looking through a portal looks like. So
Oh,
otherworldly, or what do I want to say, like looking out into the universe kind of a thing. So it's almost like the eye seems to me like it's maybe a reference to some gate where there's an angelic being just awaiting on the other side.
oh, interesting. Interesting. Okay.
Mm,
Well, that is all grist for the mill. And then here's the second pattern that's echoed. So we've seen those East and West Bay windows at First Congregational's
yeah.
sanctuary. And then if you look, the look at the far right hand picture here of the addition that First Methodist put on in I think it's the 1990s. And they've got these windows. It's the same pattern as in First Congregational's window bays,
Hmm.
except it's single rather than double.
Mhm.
Do you see that? And then they've echoed that same pattern on their new church sign. That's really interesting to me that these patterns are echoing each other. Now, am I supposed to understand from that the fact that it's single at First Methodist and double at First Congregational? That I mean, I don't know what I should understand by that, I guess is what I'm saying.
That's what I would say because what it looks like is there's a single gate at the First Methodist Church, and there's two
To the
at
first.
the
Oh,
First
wow. Okay.
Congregational.
Okay.
And if you look
But
at
is it
the door frame to First United Methodist, it's not terribly fluted, but there is a kind of a step in.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
So I'm wondering if that gate might go south.
Yeah, yeah. I
yeah.
definitely think that's signaling a Hellgate. Yeah, I definitely think so. If that's telling us that there's a single gate at First Meth and a double gate at First Congregational, does it the fact that the pattern is echoed, does it tell us anything about the relationship of those two gates? Do you think? I don't know.
I don't
Maybe
either.
not. Maybe not. But I'm wondering. Um, Okay, so again, I was less certain of First Congregational holding one of the four cardinal encampment positions. Now I'm more convinced. Thank you, ladies. Uh, but so I I guess that's what I have for today. I'm
Yeah.
gonna continue to plod on with these other three churches. And we should probably get together again once I'm through those and see what else we can
Yeah.
spot. I'm still sort of leaning towards First Methodist being the East Church, and I'm still sort of leaning towards First Presbyterian being the South Church. But I don't know, are there things that you see? The other thing that makes me wonder about First Congregational maybe being the North or the West position is that it seems to me like the colors, there's an awful lot of blue and purple in
Yeah.
that church, which signifies a different light spectrum. So I'm wondering if it makes sense that that's maybe a north or a west position church.
Well, blue's definitely a West color, so
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's definitely, I mean, the thing is it stands out. It doesn't matter what direction it is. It's signifying that even among elites, it's an elite building.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah. Elite among the that's who. Yeah,
The
the
elite
elite,
among
elite
the
among the
elite.
elite.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Mm,
Okay.
wow.
Okay. Well,
If you told me like 4.5 years ago that I'd be having this particular conversation, I would have told you were nuts. Because
ditto.
this is, yeah, this is
Yeah.
it's so interesting, but it's so far out. It really is.
Yeah.
It takes a minute to let it sink in, which I think is what I'm going to have to do is go back and listen and let it sink in and think about it a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do a lot of mulling these days, a lot of mulling.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about that, it's like when you incubate on something for like a long time, when you let a thought or a series of thoughts incubate, like it's amazing that over time, things do start to occur.
Yeah.
you know, like pieces start to fit together. But some things you do have to look at for a long time or think about for a long time before. And sometimes you may have to wait for an additional puzzle piece too,
Like Rachel.
Yeah, like,
Rachel.
yes,
Rachel's our
right.
additional puzzle piece.
Exactly.
Thank you,
Uh,
Exactly.
Rachel. Thank you
no,
for
you're
making
quite
this
welcome.
make
Yes.
sense. I like it
Yes.
when things make sense.
I don't know if I made
Yes.
it make sense or if I made it
No, I
made
think
it even worse.
yeah, no, you
No,
did.
no, not at
Definitely.
all.
Yeah.
This is
We look at these
better.
things and
Yeah.
go, is this possible? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe that means something. Maybe it doesn't mean something. And you're like, maybe it means this. And we're like, oh,
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah,
Well, and
definitely.
that's why, like when I sent Rachel a message the other day, you don't know this, Veronica, but I sent Rachel a message the other day with one last slide that I wanted to pop into the deck. I'd sent you guys the images in advance so that you could kind of think about them. But I told Rachel, I said, so here's another thing that I think is a really good clue. But if you think I'm ridiculous for including this, tell me to get over myself. Or something along those lines. Because I don't know. I mean, like all I can do is take what people who've come out, of
Yeah,
these situations tell me, and try to put them together as logically as I can, and fill in gaps where
yeah,
I think I can. But I'm always willing to be corrected because I could be getting it way wrong.
Well, I'm willing to be corrected. And yeah, I mean, I'm coming out of it, but I mean, I'm still willing to be corrected. Please.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, a lot of us don't even want to know. Well, we don't want any of this to be real.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's the hard
Right.
part. The hard
Yeah.
part is it's real and it's so hidden, and then the ones of us who don't know anything about it really want to learn, and the ones who have been through it don't really want to face it anymore. But
Well, and sometimes you're like, well, where did I learn this from?
right,
How
Right.
do I know
right,
this? It's,
right.
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
people want to know, how do you know this? And it's like,
I just
God,
know. I just
I don't
know. Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Yep. It's down there deep from somewhere and from something that happened, but yeah, might not be able to pull back why yet or ever.
That's okay.
Yep. It is okay. It
Yeah.
is okay.
And we're grateful for
So,
everybody who does share, because every little bit helps, and nobody has a full picture of the entire scheme. So the more bits we can gather, the better off we are in putting together that puzzle.
yeah, absolutely. And we're super grateful to you, Rachel, for being willing to do this with us and take the time to look at research and possibilities and weigh in. It means the world to me.
Sure, anytime, anytime.
Great. Well, then I'll take you up on that. Fantastic.
One day
Well,
Thank you
we're
for
gonna
having
sit
me.
around for, oh yeah,
yeah,
delighted, absolutely delighted to have you. Thank you for coming. One day we're all
yeah,
gonna sit around with our cup of whatever and think about how much the world has changed because we hopefully have
Made a
made some
difference.
things come out into the light
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
done some of the darkness in. At least that's my hope. I'd like to think that at the end of the day, I have the ability, even if I don't know exactly how I'm doing it, to do some damage to the darkness
Mm,
and to put little rips and tears so that the light can shine through.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Amen. Amen.
All right.
Well,
Well,
thank you again, ladies. I really appreciate the time and the discussion.
absolutely. You want to end off in prayer? You would like me to, or how do you
I
want
will
to?
happily do that if you'd
Okay.
like.
Sure.
Father God, thank you so much for the opportunity to gather together as friends and fellow researchers and people who have had experiences. And thank you for the minds that you give us and the ways that you speak to us through the power of your Holy Spirit, the way that you reveal things to us. Thank you for the fact that our experiences are not wasted. They are never wasted. They are always valuable. And the fact that we can share those with each other, our insights, so many things that you give us the opportunity to see and do and experience. Father, you are sovereign over all things. And, we talk about a lot of things that are associated with darkness. And yet, there's nothing that you don't allow for a reason. And you have already defeated the enemy and you are busy finishing him off. Praise the Lord. And I just pray that you would guard us and keep us as we continue to do the work that you have set before us, that you would continue to reveal things to us, show us things, that the people who hear or watch this podcast would benefit from the discussion, the decode, the insights that Rachel has provided, the research that I've done, the research that Veronica has done, and in their own way, each of the listeners to this podcast would be using the information here to take back the darkness, to reclaim it for the kingdom of God in their own way, in the way that you created them to do. And we just pray all of these things in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, audience, for being a part of this with us. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for trying your best to grapple through and understand this just like we are wrestling with it as well. And we will see you next time on another edition of V in the Wild. Take care.